Okay, I'm Holly Goodson. I'm a biochemist and cell biologist in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I also have a concurrent appointment in Biological Sciences, and I've been at Notre Dame since 2000.
Okay, so how long have you been teaching?
I've been teaching since the first semester here. Most of my teaching has been in large classes, although recently I've gotten to have some fun teaching small classes.
Are there any, what are the inherent problems with teaching a large class?
One of the most challenging aspects of teaching a large class that I've run into is figuring out how to make personal connections with the students without overwhelming you as an instructor and or the TAs because they're trying to do graduate school work as well. And I know that one of the main topics that you wanted to discuss today was Piazza, and I would say that Piazza has actually been very helpful in furthering that goal because it allows one of the things it does is many students have exactly the same question, and so it really suppresses the 50 emails explaining to you that, for example, there's a piece of information left out of problem set number 2, okay? And that has really increased the efficiency. A second thing that has been very useful from the standpoint of teaching is that in a large class with potentially other faculty and certainly many teaching assistants, it allows one to set up a conversation where everybody can take part in the conversation without having a series of different email threads that one has to keep track of. To go back to the issue of communicating individually with particular students, it's also allowed me to, students have questions, we can get them answered very quickly. Again, keeping it out of your email, because in a large class, the cluttering up of email is something that honestly makes teaching those classes very difficult to handle and balance with the rest of your life. So making all communications be through Piazza can really be helpful.
Now, I know one of the features of Piazza is the anonymous forums. Do you ever use it for anonymous responses? Do you feel that students are more open if they have the opportunity to hide behind?
Actually, I do think that's a very interesting aspect of it. I'm going to come back to that question with regard to the small classes in a minute because I think it's particularly important there. But in the large classes, I also think that the students like the anonymity. You may have discussed Piazza and how it works in other ways, but a key aspect of Piazza that is very useful is that students can edit their own, the student responses can be edited by other students. And the anonymity is useful because nobody wants to, A, seem stupid by asking a stupid question, but equally, students don't want to seem too smart by answering the question. And so, and they don't want to correct another student with their name attached to it. But if people can go in and edit and hone the answer and or add other answers and follow-ups, et cetera, I think the anonymity is actually very useful. Now, one important thing is that the settings that I use are anonymous to each other, but not to me. And so, in fact, I do, depending on the year, this varies, but some years I actually explicitly give extra credit for people that do particularly good jobs in answering other students' questions, again, sort of crowdsourcing the teaching. But even in cases where I don't explicitly do that, I have given credit to people who have really made an effort to help other students. And so being able to keep track of that is very useful.
Do you use it for anything besides the interaction of like a forum sort of? Are there any other like homeworks that you send to them?
In the large classes, I've not used Piazza for homeworks, but I have sometimes used it to get opinions on things, used class polls, gotten input on, actually one thing I have used, use this as a way of asking for questions that students think might be useful kind of practice exam questions for each other. And so they submit the questions that way. They can see each other's questions so I don't get 50 copies of the same question. Say, okay, each new question needs to be different. And so that's been one aspect that was useful. To go maybe briefly to the smaller classes, where I've used Piazza is in classes where the students are learning presentation skills. Okay, and so the two examples were the Glenn Honors Program Senior Colloquium and some graduate student classes on presenting papers. And in both of those classes, what we did was a student would present, and then each of the students in the audience would answer a series of questions about the presentation, and what was excellent, what maybe was confusing, what needed to be improved, any other comments. And then they submitted those comments so that only the student presenter and the instructor could see them. And so this was actually a very efficient way to do this, because otherwise, if you collect pieces of paper or things via Sakai, you would have to collect it and then redistribute it to the student who was the presenter. This way, the student gets basically nearly immediate feedback on what was good and what wasn't. And I would say that this was one of the best uses of Piazza that I've seen.
So in the early days, we didn't have it plugged into Sakai quite. So students had to set up their own accounts?
Yeah, that actually was kind of a big hassle, and we ended up with problems where students had multiple accounts and they would complain miserably because they would get too many emails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's actually pretty streamlined. One suggestion that I would have if you're going to use Piazza is that you set up an assignment, at 1 point, something trivial, but actually graded, where they get the point by actually making a post. Okay, because otherwise they're going to whine that they don't know how to do it, and then they're going to forget, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually very easy, but like all things, there's a little bit of an activation energy barrier. So that, to me, is the easiest way to do it. Just tell them at the beginning, here's how you do it, and you will get 1 point, okay, of homework credit for actually making a test post. And it can simply just say test. Okay, and then I can read out who all has made a post, okay, and then give them their credit.
Okay, so if you could just take me through how the students had to get to Piazza before, and then once we integrated it into Sakai, how the students get into Piazza now.
Okay, in the far distant past, when Piazza was first done, they actually had to go to a separate link that I would have to mail them, and then that was the course page, but they had to independently go to that course page. Now it's actually just like getting like anything else in Sakai. So there's a link to the gradebook, there's a link to the resources, and there's a link to Piazza, and so it's seamless.
What kind of input do you get from students now that they're using Piazza on a regular basis? Do you get any input from them about how helpful it is for them? What are their comments about it?
That's an interesting question. So as you might imagine, the student ideas run the gamut. First, in the small class, the students actually liked it very much. I think they all thought that this was a very good way to give and get feedback. There were basically no negative comments on Piazza in the small presentation classes. In the large freshman class, there were people, especially when I was requiring them to participate in Piazza, there were people who said that it was a waste of time. But I think they were probably going to say it was a waste of time no matter what. To be honest, okay, freshman class freshman engineers taking biology, I bet they think the class is not something that they need to be doing. So we have to gauge their concerns there. But I think a lot of people did find it to be a very useful way to get information.
So using it from year to year, how easy is it for you now preparing for next semester to just set up your new semester with Piazza? Does it take much time?
It doesn't take very much time because you honestly really don't have to do very much. There's just going to be sort of a course information page where you put in some text, it's straightforward, and then you need to set up the folders. One thing students sometimes get confused about is that when you make a post, you have to assign it to a folder. Okay, that's not a big deal. Usually my typical folders might be homework questions, exam questions, logistics, and other. Okay, and maybe a media links folder. And so you just have to pick folders. That's not too big a deal, but initially it's confusing because students don't necessarily understand what's going on with that.
And because it's plugged into Sakai at the beginning of the semester, it already knows, populates with all the students that are in the class. But do they have to click into the link?
They do have to click into the link before they get any Piazza. So to be honest, I do not know from the student perspective exactly what the process is now. I just know that they do have to click into it. There may be a couple of other clicks that they have to do to activate it, but until they've clicked into it and done those couple of minor things, then it's not active. It may be that there is a very first time that net ID logs into Piazza that they have to do more, and then after that, I think it's actually very straightforward.
See if there's anything else, because you're really answering these questions well. So are there any other apps or or software or websites that you add? This doesn't have to be a full integration,
Mhm.
but what other things do you plug into your Sakai course to make it more complete?
The main thing that we have been using, and I'm not sure that this is the best way to do this, but it has been useful, is Poll Everywhere. That has been a very good way to get input from the class. I would say I use Poll Everywhere in 3 ways. One is it's kind of like a clicker. For people who aren't familiar with Poll Everywhere, it's sort of like a clicker, but you don't need the physical clicker device. You can just do it on your phone. The second thing about Poll Everywhere that is useful is that there is, it's set up to be able to allow you to generate useful polls and use them from year to year to year. And so that aspect of it is good because you can just transfer your material over pretty straightforwardly. How I use it in the class is at least once a day, I'll ask a question about something that I know that students have trouble with. And so I'll give them 4 answers, and one of them is I know what they're likely to answer that isn't correct. There's usually a couple of distractors, and then there's the 4th thing, which is actually right, but I know that historically that they don't tend to choose because there are misconceptions about this thing. And so we ask the question, and then they get it wrong, and we show them the answers because you can show the students what the distribution is and say, okay, this is wrong, talk to each other, and let's try to figure out what the answer is. And it is interesting to see, in most cases, how quickly the crowd then does converge on the right answer. And that I do think helps to reinforce what they've been trying to learn so that I could just tell them, but it would go in one ear and out the other. But being confronted with their own misunderstanding does tend to make it stick better. An aspect then that we also use is so an additional way that we've used Piazza in a small class was in a situation where students have to work in groups on a project. So in our fermentation and distillation class, they have to get together and come up with something where they might just be, actually I have to be careful about the sorry, I'm going to do this again because I don't want to advertise too much what we're doing in this class. Okay, so I'll rephrase that. So we're going to start over again. One other thing that we've used, a way that we've used Piazza in small classes has been in a situation where students need to work together on a project. And they will propose a project, but we often are going to need to modify that project. And so this is a class where there are multiple students in a team and there's multiple instructors. Everybody needs to be able to see this back and forth. By email, this would be a nightmare. With individual pieces of paper, it would also be quite annoying. But what happens is the students craft their project, make a post to all instructors and then everybody specifically on their team, and then one of the faculty members or multiple can then write comments about how they should tune up their project. And so it ends up being quite efficient. Everybody can see what's going on. Nobody has to find anything in their email. You can immediately go to Piazza and find it, and it's actually been quite useful.
Outstanding. That's great. A great collaboration tool.
I'm gonna keep recording until we walk out.
Okay. I think Sakai is very useful. It is very flexible, and like many flexible tools, there can be a high learning curve. It's kind of like Photoshop, okay? It can give you the rope to hang yourself with, but it will eventually do what you want it to do. And here I'm going to put in a plug for Laura and the whole team that helps everyone. It can be very difficult to figure out what to do, but the Sakai team has really been excellent in helping us figure out how to do it.
Well, God bless you for that little extra.
Well, but it's true, so it's...
We're trying to find somebody that would be willing to hire someone else in the Sakai team, so there's not just 2 of us doing a lot of that stuff, although there's 4.
You know, one wonders if you could pay a student to help. Students only know what the student experience is, not what the faculty's experience is, but especially a grad student who has actually been already doing the interfacing with Sakai could potentially help you out a lot by doing the really boring stuff, which is telling people how to do the same thing over and over and over again for the people who've never used it, right?
Yeah.
That's not really kind of a good use of your time. But so that would be something maybe to consider as a graduate student who knows Sakai both from the student perspective and from the faculty perspective. There are all sorts of rules in the grad school about how you can and can't pay people, but I think it's an interesting possibility. Departments pay people to be TAs within the department, and you might be able to pay somebody to be a TA within Sakai. And it would be so many, hours per week, And so to think about it, it would probably be much less expensive per hour than hiring an outside professional. And also, they might be much quicker at updating their knowledge of what's going on because, again, they're actively doing it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great idea. Huh. That's a good idea.
Okay, I think maybe just so that I can take the time.
And this will probably take us about 15 minutes. But
Okay.
We'll see how much fun we have just talking.
Okay.
So if you would introduce yourself.
Okay. I am Arthur Lim of the Math Department. I'm a faculty member of the Math Department. I've been at Notre Dame since 2006. Yeah, so it's been a while. Yeah.
So what is it that you're teaching here?
Here, I'm teaching this year the calculus for life science and social science. And also in the spring, there is an upperclassmen dynamical system that I teach. I actually wrote and designed that class. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the teaching style that you had that brought you to Maple TA, like how you were using Sakai, but where it maybe fell short, and then when you started your search for
Okay.
something else.
So how did it all start, right? Oh, that was, I think, 2008 is when I start to realize that being able to give students feedback immediately is important. Being able to have students have their own set of problems is important. They're not really copying, not at Notre Dame because they are so much more on the ball. So what's happening is there's over collaboration. So somebody will be in the group that's so good at the work, get to do everything, the rest just tag along and everybody says yes and they sign off and they think they have done their homework. But math cannot be learned this way. It's almost like driving. I mean, you can say someone is at the driving seat, it's always good. Until you're behind the wheels, then it's confusing, right, on your own, and you have to make all these decisions. And I always love this analogy. You have to go from point A to point B with no accidents. So then, as far as learning math is concerned, it's very hands-on. A lot of experience is involved. Yeah, you actually need to get into things. You have to learn a lot by experience. You have to learn how to navigate mistakes that you make and learn from them. So what the online system can do for us is actually give this kind of opportunity. Yeah. So the main thing is that the question needs to be algorithmic. Everybody needs to have their own set of problems. In some sense, same question, different numbers is the main things I'm looking for. Of course, there are other combinations, but this is mainly what it is. Yeah. So what sold me to this, right? This online system. I think when for the first time when I implemented it, first of all, I already saw a change the way students interact with their homework. So how they do it is already different. You know, it's no longer saying, okay, this homework, let's write it down and then show it to your friend. Did you get this number? I got this number. Great. We move on. You know, there's one time right here in this office, I have a bunch of students coming in to ask questions. So I decided to say, okay, I'm going to show you a similar idea, a similar question, and then you're going to take a step at your own problem. Because now everybody have their own problem, right? So then they looked at my demonstration and I explained to them the key ideas behind it and worked through one set of problems that is mine. Maybe similar question but different functions. Okay. Then they started going back to their stuff, and some of them were actually kind of excited. The moment they saw me solve a good part of the problem to the point of saying that they can understand what to do, they started looking their question at their own and see whether they can start working on it. And after a while, of course, I'm done with talking and they are on their paper working on their question. It's almost like a game. Everybody wants to get their question right. So at the end of that problem, some of them got it right, some of them got it wrong, and this is where I saw the difference, the big difference. People will get it right and they go like, hooray, I got it right. It's like getting goals, getting points in your game, right? Okay, and then there's this other group of students that got it wrong, and they went like, "What did I do?" And the peers started looking at their sheet, and then it's so different. They start looking at their sheet, and the first thing is, "Oh, why are you doing this?" They're actually looking at their work. It's not just a bottom line. They talk about the process of the solution. And there's a big part of learning math. I'm still struggling in getting the kids to like, oh, you need to know the process, from line A to line B, what are you doing? From B to C, what are you doing? Yeah. And that experience is, well, it's not perfect, but it's as close as we can get using online assessment tools. Yeah.
So you started thinking that maybe we could try these things in tests and quizzes, but that soon became obvious that wasn't something you could do within Sakai.
Yeah.
So how many different systems did you look at before you found Maple TA? What led you to Maple TA?
So there was I think way back, was it Blackboard or WebCT? And there were some questions in there, but it's really awkward. I mean, if you want to write sophisticated question, it needs to be a very sophisticated piece of software. Okay. So some things could be done there. Pretty much is the HTML base, but it's not running on a computing software. So even if it is, it's at the back end where you can't touch it. You can't get to it. It depends on what the platform lets you control, right? Okay, they may be calculating with the whole Mathematica at the back, but you don't get to touch the Mathematica, right? So that's part of the problem. Then at which point do I realize? You will realize it really soon. The moment you try to do any more sophisticated calculus problem, or the dynamical system class is a lot of linear algebra problem, none of those can be done on Sakai or WebCT. You need a much more flexible problem editor, yeah, where you can actually code the functions in and run the code. So I found all these actually in Maple TA, and that's how it got the ball rolling.
How did you hear about Maple TA?
Yeah. So it's introduced through OIT. So there was a time when a whole bunch of us were invited to a demonstration. And since I was kind of involved with these things, they told me to kind of review it and then come with some questions to ask. So what I did was, instead of going there with questions to ask, I gave them a list of problems that I couldn't code on Sakai or on WebCT and said that, can you do this? And then they gave me all the answers. I said, wow, you can really do this. But I didn't get into the software right away because I thought, do I really need to use this? And how much work do I have to do to put all this together? And so then let's just say I wasn't desperate enough then. Okay, then 2 years later, it became very pressing because I just couldn't get the kids to do what I want them to do.
Now
Yeah.
you use this for that. Isn't this? Could every door outside possibly open and shut at the same time?
It's okay.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Placement and it's actually, placement, how should I say this? Yes, there is some placement component that's going on, but mainly for readiness purposes when I started using it. And then now we expanded it to for credit exam. And that's important. I said, okay, I'll make comment about each of these usage. For credit exam, why is it good to have the online assessment? You want immediate result. You want to know whether they pass or fail, and then you can, advise accordingly right away. Can you do this class? Do you skip? Right? That's the first thing. Then for readiness, okay, this is big, right? So every year we'll be struggling with kids coming in and say that, oh, you could have told us earlier that you need to know all this content before we even come in. We're also curious what is expected at Notre Dame. So then what I've done with Maple TA was to actually design a whole bunch and code in a whole bunch of readiness exam questions and get them to work on them during the summer. I'll send an email through the listserv and ask them to, get on this and take a look at it. And I even have accompanying videos that I made for some of these questions. I say that if you forget this, I'm not telling you to drop the class, but you need to get ready for the class. And just over this period of, say, a month or so, just review it and make sure that so that you can, ease into Notre Dame. And there's so much going on here. It's better that way, isn't it? Yeah. So that's one of the huge usage. And the other usage is, of course, I think if I teach the class, it'll be so much more better if I can actually get the student to work out some of the problems that to the standard I expect them to. Maybe there are some tricks that I really want them to learn. Maybe there are things like common mistakes that I see. After a few years teaching the subject, you will know that, I sure wish these portions is being prod. Or mix and match certain problems in one single problem set where they are always confused about. And that's always hard to do if you use resources that come from the textbook. They may not write it that way. So let's just say that MapleTA allows me to kind of actualize myself more as a teacher. Just by the way the questions are being put together is more me, so the kids are getting a lot more me. I don't know whether they appreciate it.
Now, when you first started using MapleTA then, students had to log in, right? So let's talk about how it used to be and then if it's better now that it's plugged into Sakai.
Oh, certainly.
So how did they have to do it before? And then?
Okay, so when it first started, I have to get the student to buy their own access in. But then I pay for an account fee. So I have to set up an account for my own usage. And then they will log in to the MapleTA platform through their own webpage. There's a lot of problem with this. I'll tell you what's the problem. It's very difficult to identify that that's the right student, the right person. Right? You need to authenticate it, right? And so but I started using this at the upper level class. So those students, the class is very small, like no more than 20, so it's a lot more easier for me to regulate this thing. But then once I tell them, I say, okay, go sign up, it's almost impossible to tell who is who because they go by emails and everything, and I pretty much have to go by the names, and since there's only 20%, it's easier to manage. But if you're talking about a course of 300%, that is no longer possible. Right? And you need identifiers so that you can download the grades and upload to the right place and use that to calculate their final grades. Yeah.
Because often the account that they sign up under didn't match their net ID.
Oh no. Even if I ask them to put in net ID, it's a nightmare. I still use some of these publisher resources, and I can give as clear an instruction as I want. It's not going to happen. Okay, the net ID will always be messed up. Either it becomes some 901 number, or you put in net ID with a capital letter, that's all over, that's finished, right? Or net ID with spaces. Of course, all those could be dealt with using Excel spreadsheet because you can, lowercase and trim things off. But for the most part, it's a pain. Usually it can take up to 3 weeks to settle that. Yeah.
So now
it's plugged in. So it's done through the LTI, and that's a dream come true. I think I should say 2 huge dreams come true. Number one, the LTI plugin totally resolved the registration issue. There's none of those. Right? Number two, I have almost the perfect tool to write the kind of question I want. If there's any problem with MapleTA as an instructor, will be you actually have to put in your own question. They do not have a question bank. They have some questions for you to use, but they are not me. Some of the questions that they put in that's open source is not what I want. Too easy, sometimes irrelevant. So I need to put in a lot of questions. So I've been doing that through the years. Of course, none of these things are possible without help from the dean from first year study. He's the one that gave the support first. And then later on, when the full proposal was written, it was sent to UCAT. And Ron Kramer came in with the rest of the money. And now the full dream has come true. It's a full campus license. Use it as much as you want. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yes.
So who else is using it now that you know?
Now that I know, okay, so I told you about first year study using for credit exam. And then there are, I'm using it for the calculus course. Those that I know, the big ones, I know psychology department is using it. See, that in some sense, I didn't expect that something that's non-STEM will pick it up faster. But we should think out of the box. It's just because it's STEM all over it saying that, this is for the sciences. Look, the hardest thing to code is always the math. But if you just need multiple choice or fill in the blanks or matching problems, they have all those tools in there. Yeah. So then psychology picked it up right away and give it as I think they do it seriously. They give all their exams on it. Every one of the exams, yeah.
So does it have a lockdown browser?
It has a lockdown
question
browser.
banks that they can draw from?
They build in their own question bank. So I told you there's no, but it's easier for them to do it because it's multiple choice. All they have to do is to copy and paste the choices and the question in. It's not like mine is all algorithmic. The functions are changing, the numbers are changing, and I have to actually code all of them in. Yeah. But it's a one-time deal, huh?
It handles both.
It handles both, sure. Yeah, you can even have. I think that you can even submit short answer question, and have them run through your short answer question and see whether some keywords are there. So it's a grading aid. You still have to grade it, but if none of the keywords are there, probably this answer is not right, right? There's those kind of usage that I don't use them for. What else is there that is being used? I know.
Browser?
Lockdown browser mainly for credit exam, the test that is for credit. I don't use a lockdown browser because it's for homework and exercises, readiness exercises. I don't use those. But the feedback for the student is as quick as it gets on submission. I remember growing up as a student, when I get my homework back, I don't even know what I did. It's the same for the kids. It's almost a week return time. But now with this technology, none of it is there. And what's important is also multiple attempts. Right? This is never possible with paper and pencil homework. Never possible. Yeah.
Can they get feedback within the quiz right now on this question before they even move on?
Can they get feedback as in whether you can there is a little button that you can click on if you release that tool in Mapletea that says how am I doing. So if they click on that button and they will pre-grade them, but they won't tell them the answer. They will just tell them that okay, there's a problem with this step, there's a problem with this answer, there's a problem here. Yeah.
Oh, that's great feedback.
Yeah, then yeah, I usually use those for very hard questions. Because it's frustrating to go through that much before you realize that it's wrong. And then if you actually submit at the end, it could be 2 full pages of work and you have to redo the whole thing again. Yeah. So I usually set those up for the harder type questions. Maybe for the upper level classes, there are those questions that are this. For the lower level classes, I noticed that if I give them multiple attempts, they will get there. Right? Because now things are it's more fluid now. You can rerun the problem and say submit it, you got it wrong, and I can even supply the answer to that problem. They can look through the solution and say that is that how I'm supposed to do it? And so it's immediate feedback. And then they can rerun the problem. The numbers are all different, so they cannot just take the old numbers and stick it in. They actually have to walk through that entire process over again. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing about it is that because there's a process of solution, sometimes for some questions, I can actually ask them for answers in between steps. So then that way I know that they kind of check through that process. It's like little checkpoints along the way that, okay, if you get this part right, this part right, this part right, then you're getting to the end correctly, right? And those have yield very interesting results because I've seen students that can get the final answer correct, but there were in between things wrong. And those are usually definition problems. Is it they don't even know what the question is asking for. So then it reflects how much did they really even know what they are doing. So there are some complicated word problems where you need to understand information, who they are. All the basic component questions almost all wrong, but the final answer is right. So what is telling me is that, okay, they don't know what they are dealing with, but they know how to just follow like a black box process and just crunch out a number. That's also another kind of bad, right? And these kind of things are hard to pick up. But then with this kind of technology, this new technology, there's a lot of things I can do to play around. I'm still designing lots of questions, and the more you play with it, the more diabolical it can become. Okay.
That's awesome. What kind of analytics? Go ahead.
I was gonna say this is like super low on battery, so if you
Okay.
have like any big
Yeah, there's a
questions,
real one. Well, I think we've covered. Yeah, plug it into Sakai. How does it work?
Do you need batteries?
I may.
I can go to the main office and get you one. Is that something that you need?
Well, yeah, it's AA. I want to see if
probably
we can.
close.
I wanna
We're
see
probably
if-
like
yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You think we're good with 5 minutes?
I think so.
Or just play safe, change it?
Let's risk it. Let's just.
Go
Okay.
for it. We're gonna go for it. Well,
Okay.
I finally got my phone to shut
Too
up,
much
so-
too much stories to tell.
No, it's so interesting.
Okay.
I still love math. It's less dangerous. Okay, so we got how that was before, how it is now. Okay, so I'll just ask maybe a couple more questions. Like, so what's your student feedback, or have you been able to see like a significant change now that you've been using it?
So I think across the board, online system, this assessment tool has really helped students to learn. I've seen huge improvement just looking at student test scores. The first time I implemented it, there was a huge shift in the average score upward, fortunately. But if you ask the student what is their feedback, the first thing they tell you, I hate this thing. Well, it's constantly telling them that they are wrong. Well, don't you want it? Yeah, so then it can be frustrating that way. Then the other thing that's frustrating is that you have to deal with all this input into a computer for math. There are math editors, they can put in exactly equation. But because you're kind of typing things in and you cannot make a single mistake in them, sometimes it's very frustrating. They think they are close enough, even if they get the correct answer, but for some reason the syntax wasn't put in correctly, they are graded wrong. So those are so-called problems. But I've come to kind of come to appreciate that because I finally managed to get students to pay attention to what they write and how they write things, right? So there's this additional bonus there. Is it perfect? What are the biggest headache? Usually is, it can time out when students forget to keep things active. Like maybe if a student actually decided to work on a question, it has to be paper pencil, and then it'll be a while before they get back to the box and put things in. You can go to sleep, and so then the frustration is that the moment it goes to sleep, and if that problem is not saved, the next time they run it up again, the numbers will change. They have to redo the whole thing. Yeah, I mean they still have the same number of attempts because they didn't submit anything, but unfortunately they lose the numbers. But these companies are getting very good at designing these things. If you bother to like launch a problem and save it first, it keeps that number for you. Yeah. So then you can, there's a workaround. But it's just that there are new things to learn. They have to get used to a new environment, and I think that there are some pushback in that. Other than that, I think most of the time what I'm seeing is that students will complain about all these new inconvenience, but then at the end of the day, if they see their test grades is high, nobody's going to complain about that. Yeah.
Are there any, this doesn't necessarily have to be caught, but are there any analytics on the back end that you're getting out of Maple TA that could tell you those things? How
So
many attempts at some problems?
number
or which
of
ones are
attempts of a problem,
which ones are
those, yeah, and then you can of course look right away at the why are they getting certain parts of a problem wrong, and you know that, oh, they still cannot understand this. Okay, and usually is okay, maybe at the end of a set of homework, there are some type of question they're always getting wrong. Those are the main ones, right? And then the other one is, how much time did they spend on the homework? And so these are usually the ones that the so-called students who are not particularly studious. And you can kind of pick up what you spend 5 minutes on this homework and you think you can make it. Really, there were those, and then of course, if they didn't turn in anything, you can tell right away there's a problem. Then the time they log in to do their work also tells me something about their learning habits. Like, do they log in like everything after 10 p.m.? Are they extra active after 12 a.m.? Those things, you can use it to your advantage and say that, I don't think I recommend reviewing for a math exam at that time.
2 o'clock in the morning. On Sunday.
Yeah. And there was all that, that I hardly had to deal with any kind of real cheating. Once in a long while, I do have people say things like, I try to get in to access this and it's not working. And if I check their log, I can realize from there that, I don't think you did that, But, that doesn't really come up too often. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
Well, I think we have a lot of good stuff.
We do.
I think we have a lot of good